All right. Welcome to week 3 of the Foundation's pilot prototype. Um, let's kick off with a check-in round. So I think the check-in for this morning or today, whatever time zone we're all in, will just be like what's on top for you at the moment, anything you sort of want to say to arrive, and then we'll jump into sort of review of last week and what's been going on. Um, I'll kick off. I got in from a flight from Sydney at like 2 a.m. in the morning, and it's about 8 a.m. now. So had a few hours sleep and feeling a bit rough, but it is gorgeous blue skies here. So pretty happy to be back home. And we're staying at a friend's house, which was just not our house, and it was a different sort of setup. And it's just so happy to be home and see the dogs and have sunny skies, and yeah, feeling good. So that's me. Let's go with Sarah.
Hello, your doggies are so cute. Are they German Shepherds?
They are, yes.
Oh my God, my favorite animal. My favorite dog breed. Um, okay, check-in. Top of mind, just really excited to dive in this week, um, and share what's happened in the last week with the team. So yeah, feeling good. I My uncle came into town this week, so kind of a surprise for me. So that was nice. Have family around.
Oh, who do you want to nominate next?
Oh, sorry. Josh.
So I'm going through and grading several hundred student projects for the Academy, and I'm learning a lot about how to optimize student submissions for the future so this can be totally automated. So I'm feeling excited about that, but also it's like I'm just slogging through this process now. It's a learning experience. And I learned that the guy that I work closely with on the developer program is going to be leaving in like a few weeks. So it's like bittersweet because he gets to go on to better things. We're still going to be working together, kind of, but it's also an opportunity to grow. So I'm excited about that as well.
I guess I'll go. Um, I'm just really sad today. Fuck. My cat is sick, so I had to take her to the vet. So I'm just a little sad today, but I'm happy to be here. It's a nice distraction. So ignore me. I'll be fine. Yeah, all good. I had a great day yesterday. I got a lot done. I have all my stuff on Asana, and I was like click, 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 and it felt really rewarding. So yeah.
Sorry to hear that, Claudia.
That's
okay. Yeah, sorry to hear that.
That's okay. Anybody have a joke? Lighten the mood. Yeah.
Not good at jokes.
I've got my favorite. I'm really good at jokes. The longer I've taught, the better I get at jokes, and at least I think so. And I got the world's worst thesaurus the other day. It was so terrible. It was terrible.
I got it.
Perfect timing for someone's like ding to go off, like ding. Check, as in like good joke. Yeah, it's good, cute.
I don't know any self-organizing jokes. I should work on that. No more programming ones. Cool. So it's lovely to hear from everyone. And I thought today we definitely want to hear like how people have been progressing with their team and sort of where you're going with your projects. Before we do that, I was curious just to do a review of the sort of content and concepts from last week. So just a quick, like, what did we cover last week? What were the bits that stand out for you?
So 2 things for me. One was being respectful of introducing change to a process that while you might think is not working, has been the status quo. So making sure you're not coming in to be like, this is a horrible idea, and like really being thoughtful and considerate of like how that idea came up, and being positive about it, and also respecting time. Like that really stuck with me, and I've actually been really trying to do more of that. This like in the last since we had our meeting, not that I intentionally don't, but like. My friends we're having dinner. I'm having dinner with a friend. Oh, I'm 10 minutes late. I'll be right there. Then I'm like, well, shit. I'm really not respecting time. I don't know. That was probably the most impacting part of last week's session for me. So yeah.
I want to echo the respecting time and the process of change. Like there is this whole like the full circle leadership process that it's just like making that conscious was helpful for me. And then like in the context of respecting time, like that process takes time. So you can't just be like, oh, I want to implement this new process on the team. And then like after a week be like, oh, this isn't working. Like, let's try something new. Oh, this isn't working either. I mean, you have to respect time and actually give things a chance and follow a process.
So for me, the things that I guess kept coming up again and again over the week was the team health check. And I don't know if we're going to get into sharing at all, but we had a conversation around the team health check with our team, and the full circle leadership. I've been doing some thinking on that, like for me, and where I'm strong and where I'm not so strong, right? And where I can get help in the areas where I'm not so strong, rather than just be frustrated, like smashing my head against a wall in the areas where I'm not. It's not that I can't do those areas, it's that I just don't get energy from it, right? So yeah, just being more like reflective on like, wait, where am I in this project or this piece of work, and why am I frustrated? Yeah.
No, cool. I've definitely got a lot of value from that, and I think the highlights for me were very much the conversation we had about respecting the time and processes. One part of that for me was often I don't know how long things should take. Like I don't know what the healthy amount of time is, and it's taken like lots of practice to realize actually that needs 3 months to bed in, or that's 2 weeks, or those kinds of things. So I'd love reflections from more people over time about actually what is the right amount of time for different processes is like an edge of my learning I'm quite curious about. And I think a full circle one, I've definitely found that to be one of the most useful thinking tools about reflecting on myself, but also helping people see leadership in a different way, and to sort of do the dance of leadership where people are leading on different areas, and sort of valuing all of it more equally is a part of it. And then I think the other thing I remember from last week was the stuff around how to experiment safely, how to mitigate the costs of when we do a change, how do we start to figure that stuff out. Cool. So I'd love to, I've got I guess the way I'm thinking about the sort of next 3 weeks is sort of introducing one fundamental sort of concept or idea, or what are one of the principle-based things that no matter what type of, whether you're working on feedback or roles or accountability, that what are some of the principles that you can sort of look at no matter which area you're trying to improve in your team. And so today I'll want to go a bit into like power asymmetries and how to navigate asymmetries, and also how to have a more, I guess, refined or discerning view of power in teams. And so that's sort of like the topic or the conceptual stuff. But then I also really just want to have the deeper conversation about actually where are you at with your team health checks, where are you at with your team thinking and initiatives, and then basically together workshop a plan for, okay, what are the things that you want to try and do in the next couple of weeks. So that's basically the 2 chunks of today. Any questions or comments or preference about which order we tackle them in?
I think the order you suggested is fine.
Cool. All right.
There may be some learnings from the, the power asymmetry piece. I'm really excited to get into that we can fold into next steps for the team health checks.
Work for folks? All right, so I've got rough notes on this one. And I find that, again, like most of the stuff that I find, did I share the right screen? I think that was the wrong one.
It was Leadwise Wiki.
Yeah, wrong one. This is just a real-time board that I'm using to sort of make notes, and here's some of the things from the week 2, or the health check things. I think we did that was week 1 actually. But down here, I find that look, most of the stuff I find valuable is really simple, and it doesn't take very long to explain. So this is much more, but I find it takes a long time to reflect on and think on and get value. And for me, this key idea of a team or a group has got power asymmetries or power contours is one of the words I use. And I found that you can break it down into a lot of different sections. So the idea of if you've got people with vastly different amounts of money, you've got an asymmetry in the way they'll relate together. And if you think about the relationship with investors and investees and the dependency that's in there, there's one, some of the reading for after this is along the lines of Benita Roy. Anyone come across her work? So she's, I'd say, very academic, theoretical. I don't really apply her frameworks to my work, but I've gotten inspiration from the way she thinks and the way she talks. And so one of the ones she talks about when she says actually what is power, and she talks about the idea of two people with asymmetric needs and wants, but the ability to achieve them. So it's a case of, if I want to move a couch, but it's too heavy for me, and there's some strong people around, then they essentially, there's a relationship where I need them to do something for me, and they might not need anything from me. Like, that's a power asymmetry in a way. And so the idea of people needing different things from each other, having different skills and having different resources is one of the ways that she sort of breaks down and thinks about power, which I found quite useful. And she often talks about the asymmetry between people's power. And I found it really useful to sort of break it down into the ideas of money, legal rights, information, relationships. Like, these are the sort of 6 areas where I've seen it crop up. And so the idea of, like, it's quite obvious when money sort of comes into play in certain aspects, but also I find it's usually not in terms of a small team, usually isn't a big differential, or it doesn't matter that much, because it's really people are showing up with different things. And if people are getting paid different amounts, it sometimes matters, but it's not the biggest common sort of thing. I found legal rights to be an area where there's very clear asymmetries, where it's like, oh, if someone can vote in and they're a shareholder with voting rights versus someone who's not, or someone who's got the legal rights to fire someone else, or someone who's got legal rights under an employment contract, that often I find this is where, like, power gets really clear and cut, but it's often people don't look much further than that. So it's like, oh, cool, you've got an employer and an employee, and that defines some kind of asymmetry or power contour in the relationship. But it's a sort of nuanced view, and especially if you start moving towards more egalitarian legal structures, okay, we're all owning a company together, it doesn't mean that you've got equal power. It doesn't mean that the reality of the way people work together, because they've got the same legal rights. And I find that these areas here are where the real crunchy stuff is. And particularly the one of the most useful ways I've used this thinking is, if you have more power in a group than other people, and you want to help make a more smoother power contour, then it's really useful to think about these other areas. And particularly in starting in Spiral and stepping back as the sort of co-founder, or the core founder, and inviting other people to hold it equally with me, it was navigating these other ones which were really crucial. So in terms of navigating who is a leader and how do people lead and inviting people into leadership, I found these sort of just managing these power contours was a good approach. So information was a big one. Like, how much stuff do you know about how your organization works? And if you've got people with different amounts of knowledge, you'll naturally have power imbalances. And the first thing to say about this is that flat structures, I think, are impossible, but also flat structures are probably not desirable, that you do want to have sort of asymmetries, but you just want to navigate them consciously. And so if you sort of look at your team and actually says, where does all the information live and who knows stuff and who doesn't? One strategy is basically, how do you spread that information out? and how can you get more people knowing about how things work or who the clients are or all the knowledge part of it. And you can do the same on the relationships, reputation, and skills. I found that relationships I think of a lot in terms of internal or inter-organizational. Sometimes if you've got account managers, their relationships with direct individuals matter significantly. And that it's like how strong are the relationships this person has or different people have with the whole group. And that's probably the most invisible and the most sort of pervasive, I would describe, in the way teams actually work together. And then reputation is sort of like, how does the external world see people? And the idea of people's reputation and following them, I found is, it's probably the least impactful one, but sometimes it sort of comes into play. And then skills, I would say, is the next sort of big one, is around actually who can do different things. And starting to know people's different skills really takes knowing people. It's hard to sort of, most people don't show up with like a scorecard of a 1-to-10 ratio of what their skills are and you can rank them all easily. It's quite a perception or a judgment. And I found just by thinking about these different areas in how asymmetries can show up, and then having a habit of naming asymmetries and consciously trying to smooth asymmetries out, trying to get them more in balance or more harmonious and more like wavy rather than sort of jagged, is something that I found works on pretty much most sort of things. So, I find I get valuable thoughts by thinking about my problems in that way. So I've got these 3 articles from Bonnie just to sort of get a sense of her framework is OPO, I think, Open Participatory Organization. So has anyone seen her work before? Cool. So it's
I swear I have, like, it's super familiar. Her name is super familiar.
Yeah.
I probably read her stuff on Medium. It's like,
yeah, it's one of the people who's worth checking out. And I'd say that it's definitely, I find that there are probably 4 or 5 different big schools of self-organizing where I find it's useful just to get your head around their thinking. The other one is Tyranny of Structurelessness. Anyone read that? This is a classic from
awesome.
the 70s, I think, and it was kind of like the 70s. I want to say it was the activist movement in the UK, Southern Rights Female Union, Mississippi kind of thing. And so this would be the other thing that I'll link up to read afterwards. And this is so a lot of the roots work for self-organizing, or some of it. It's one strand of it is kind of like the 60s and the 70s, the activists, the women's rights, the civil rights sort of movements, which is about how do we organize without just having a boss, and how do we organize where we all have equal power and dignity and so on. And there was a lot of learnings that happened from that. This sort of paper names what can happen when you get rid of all explicit power structures and you say, cool, it's equal. There's no hierarchy, there's no things. And what can happen is that implicit power structures assert themselves. So there still are very influential people or powerful people in the group, but as a new person showing up, they don't have the title of boss or CEO or whatnot, so you can't navigate it. It's quite confusing and quite difficult to see that, and it takes time to go, oh, actually, if Bob says something, the team never does it. And so that's, or if Sarah suggests something, then people always do that. Like, it's kind of a noticing that it takes a while to navigate, and it can manifest in really unhealthy and toxic ways. So this is sort of describing some of those anti-patterns of what can happen when you just remove all explicit power structures. And so some of the thinking behind this is, by having these sort of areas in these conversations, we can actually make power more explicit in our groups, while still making it fluid, still making it dynamic, still making it a flexible sort of structure, rather than so-and-so is the leader and that is defining and crystallizing a power structure. I guess that's some, thoughts to offer into the middle. Any reflections, or what are the most interesting parts of that for you?
I mean, I read Tyranny of Structurelessness, and I share it with anyone I really start to have conversations around self-organizing with, because I think there's a lot of patterns between, like, if anyone here was to read it, you'd be able to just think consensus right away, because like a lot of, consensus has grown so fast, and the product of that is like we don't really have structures of a hierarchy, and we don't really have the structures around like a self-organizing company, so that it creates these like power vacuums, and you just see a lot of like weird stuff going on, for lack of a better term, and it's just super aligned with what you read in here. So I second reading that. It's really good. What did you say the first author was? The Medium author that you
Benita Roy.
recommended? Benita Roy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'll send all these links in Slack afterwards.
Oh, right. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, I'm going with more of a post-reading list rather than a pre-reading list for sort of these things. So I'll try and drop in a few articles each week to sort of mull on. If you want them in advance, let me know. I'm happy to sort of do it that way.
Just what you were talking about with the power contours, I'm reflecting on the Academy team, and we have a 3 co-leads model. We don't have one dedicated leader, I guess. But like each co-lead is responsible for like slightly different things within the group. But from my understanding, well, there's one person that basically does in-person training, and he's got a really good handle on that. I don't think he's as he's got more power asymmetry than the other 2 co-leads. But I think it's cool that basically I can interface with any of them if I need like to go to a leader of the group. They all share the responsibility, so it's not all on one person. And usually I just will start a group chat with the 3 of them, and one person will just be my go-to. And I really like that. I think it's healthy for the team.
I think reputation stuck out for me. There is someone on my team who I think gets away with a lot of murder because of her reputation. I didn't really think about it before until I saw it on your breakdown, on your list. And it is, I guess it is power. She sort of has this power, but it's so deceptive. It's not real, if that makes sense. And it's totally based on her reputation. My opinion anyways, based on her reputation. I can't tell if she knows that. Like I don't know if it's intentional or malicious or anything like that, but I've seen how it happens, and I've seen it unravel and sort of cause a negative domino effect. And I think I've been trying to like pinpoint what it is, and I would say it's my other theories are very colorful and expletive deleted, if you will. So I much prefer this theory.
Yeah, I find, I mean, as a sort of a geek on this stuff, I find it's easy to go into rabbit holes. Like for me, reputation, for example, is if you look at like what you would describe as like prison yard dynamics in a way, where it's like your reputation matters a whole lot. What people think about you matters a whole lot in your sort of experience. And you see this in schoolyards. You see this in sort of, if you look at the teal work, they'll describe this as the sort of red organizing level, where it's like you'll see bullying, because if everyone's scared of me and they get out of my way, I have an easier way over things than, or if everyone sees me in a certain way and knows that I always do what I say I'll do, then again, that reputation starts to have power. And in the business context, you start to see people really protecting their reputation quite fiercely. And if their reputation is under attack, or they perceive it to be under attack, then they can respond disproportionately to situations. And so it's one of those areas where I think it's useful just to name and to notice, like, actually, what are the reputations in a small group, in a large group, in wider society? I've seen this a lot in startups, where you sort of see anyone who's got a co-founder role of a venture has a sort of status inside of a team, no matter how flat they try and make it. The fact that they were a co-founder of the thing means that the world will always see them in a different way. Then they'll see employees number 2 to 5 kind of thing. Like early employee versus co-founder is just such a a status thing, which can change how teams work, from what I've seen.
Yeah, and so this person, they weren't a founder per se at all. I'm sorry, they weren't a founder, but they were one of the first ones at Consensus. And before I started working with them, I thought like there was this understanding that they were game changers, or they had this influence, or they had this power to really make things happen in the company. And it's like I've seen it now for what it is, but so many other people don't. So many other people don't, because she has this, I don't know if reputation is the right word, or status, or what, but it's all based on her time here, right? And sort of an illusion of who this person is. So sorry, I am going down a rabbit hole with this, because I maybe reputation is not the right word, but anyway, it's a word that I never didn't think of as power. So that's definitely consistent.
I'm not sure which example you're thinking of, Claudia, but I mean, I also, Joshua, was not thinking of reputation, like this concept of reputation as power. And I'm curious to know, like you mentioned that you mentioned that it's the least impactful one. And I was curious to know more about that, why you said that, because and then maybe it kind of goes back to the tyranny of structurelessness in a way, because I watched, she's no longer with the company anymore, but I watched, and Claudia and Josh are very familiar with the person I'm discussing. I watched this person take explicit action entirely for her reputation. Like I could see every single move that person did had nothing to do with the customer, had nothing to do with the people on the team, was all about preservation of and upholding their reputation. So, you know, it's funny because I gave Claudia some advice on how to handle a situation with that person, knowing very well that they would pull the reputation card and just like, you know, grind Claudia up like ground beef in a to go into a skillet. But like, yeah, just like I guess I never thought about it in that way, but I just, yeah, in terms of like gaining power, but like I thought it was all about like self-preservation, like reputation preservation.
And I find that thing, it feels to me a little bit of a tangent around power contours, like reputation. And this is where I find there's a fascinating, one of the first ideas I got hold of in the self-organizing movement was around intrinsic motivation. So like the autonomy, mastery, purpose, reputation kind of dynamics. And that if you can create a system or a game where people can move forward on those sort of 4 areas, they'll be really driven to participate, and it'll be fun, and people love working in that way. So how can you make the dynamics of work or the structure of tasks at work look more like the structure of tasks at play? And so are people familiar with these ideas? Cool. So
Daniel Pink.
Yeah. So it's I found that he's the one who's most known for it and quite popularized it. But there's a whole line of research around intrinsic motivation, and that if you look at things like surfing or playing guitar, or the things that people occupy their time with from their own volition, they usually have characteristics of it's autonomous. They choose to do it themselves. There's mastery, like you can see yourself getting better at it. Like you can play harder songs, you can surf better waves. Autonomy, mastery. There's something around it ties up with something you care deeply about. So you might love music and love sharing it with people, or love the connections you get through music, and also the reputation and status. The idea that people look at you and go, "Oh, awesome! You can play guitar well." Like you get recognition in a community from these sorts of skills, and that when something has those characteristics, there's lots of things. It starts to resemble more like play, or it resembles things which people are intrinsically driven to. And you don't need a paycheck. You don't need to have a carrot at the end of it. You do it because you kind of love it. And that if you start to look at the way organizations work, they often fall down on things like autonomy. You're told to do something, you don't choose to do it. So one of the habits I've found for every aspect of my work is basically putting choice in there for people. But if you just say, hey, if you have the where do you want to go for dinner conversation with a group, it's really frustrating when that choice manifests in that way. And often people just love it when someone just says, cool, we're going for Mexican or whatnot. It's like, that's just like, oh, thank God, they just decided, let's go. We can do something now. And I think so too much choice and too much blue sky is actually a big disservice for a group. And often what leadership is doing is listening for the needs of the group and the desires of a group, and understanding and presenting options to them, which are pretty close. So you're narrowing the field of saying, here's 3 restaurants, which we all love. And then here's a way we can quickly sort of reflect our choice together, or designing things so that individuals have choice. But so designing for autonomy is probably the one I've gotten a huge amount of value from. The other one is purpose, which is pretty, I think, more common and understood about what's the reason for being of this team? And how does that line up with the reason for being for people? And so people have different clarities of purpose, I found. Some people are really clear, like, my mission is this, my strategy is this is why I'm on this earth, and this is what I want to do. And lots of people are like, that's clear. And so the idea of talking to people about what's important to them and tying in the things that are important to them as an individual with what's important to the team or the organization is often what people look at when they're talking about alignment and fit. And mastery, I found in sort of skilled professions, most of us have this concept of mastery, but it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to see the progressions. So if you can start to help individuals see the way they can level up and what it means to get better at facilitation or programming or design. And often I found people with more clearly defined technical skills, programmers, designers, there's a kind of, they can see the status of their skill, they can see the progression of their skills easier than, say, facilitators, often leaders, where it's a bit blurry and it's a bit less clear about what good looks like. And so those kinds of, and the status thing I find is often about just recognition and common things there. So the intrinsic motivation, autonomy, mastery, purpose, recognition, I find really useful mental construct. And I got into that tangent because...
Reputation?
Yeah, so that's it. The idea of status, recognition, reputation is just a core human driver. And the idea of creating reputations, getting recognition for things, even people who don't like recognition in like public recognition of like, hey, everyone look at this person, they did amazing. Some people don't like that experience. And the idea of, but they still like the respect of people they respect. The idea of people who think are awesome, who think they're awesome, most people like that, and they strive to sort of, they use what they get recognition for in a group as a compass to navigate the sort of activities we go. So I say this I find that reputation is a really core big driver. When looking at power contours, I kind of have got less value. And again, it's still valuable. I kept it on the list, but I've got less valuable at saying, oh, cool, who's got the most reputation in this group? Whereas I found much more valuable who's got the most skills in a certain area. And the idea of naming skills, and this is where, here we've got time. Another tangent I found really useful is essentially invisible labor and emotional labor in particular. So if you start to think about, if you said, okay, write a list of all the skills in your group, and you started to write them down, it's a fun exercise to do with a team, because what you can look at is what did they miss off the list. And it might be quite common to say that emotional labor or relational work is often missed off the list. They're a really good listener. They're really good at checking in with people after they're having a hard time. Often doesn't get named as a skill. It's sort of more put as a way of being in a way, whereas it's an absolute skill. And people can learn to become more empathetic. People can learn to listen better. People can learn to sort of provide emotional support for others better. And it's a skill and it's often that women get this work and it's invisible sort of work. And there's a real trend in sort of gender biases around invisible labor as well. So I find that's a good way of naming those kinds of things, because the invisible work is often not recognized. It's not tied to pay structures. Whereas if you're, really good at programming and whatnot, it's very clear that gets linked to salary. But the actual and this emotional labor is often the underpinnings of a team cohesion. So it's incredibly important for making teams work. It can get unnamed a little bit. So I found a lot of value from skills. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say we're doing our compensation initiative right now, and that's been a huge part of what we're trying to present to the mesh, is the value in those skills. First of all, we spent like 2 days trying to figure out what the heck to call these skills, right? Like they're meshy skills, they're EI skills, they're transferable skills, and now here to hear emotional labor, that's a cool one. Anyway, we finally decided on consensus with the U skills. I don't know, I was absent that day, I don't know where that came from, but anyway, that's part of what we want to try, is like, not try, it's been on the top of the priority, like it's not just your technical skills, it's these, you know, emotional intelligence skills, like empathy, facilitating, mentoring, coaching, whatever that list is, which is something that it makes me love consensus even more, that this is something that has to be considered, and not punish someone that's like, you know, is not a people person per se, but like an encouraging variable in this equation. And I've never heard of that. I've never gone to an old boss and say, you know, I'm very sympathetic of people's feelings, so I should get 10%. Like, I would be laughed at in corporate America. Like, and I think that's what's like super cool. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. Is Search Inside Yourself a thing common in Consensus, the book? So this was I got this from Dev Bootcamp, and it was a core part of their emotional empathy course. And we've built up our human skills course in Dev Academy for training programmers. And it's one of, particularly if you're dealing with engineering mindsets, I found it's, because it's from Google, and they've been doing it for like 7 or 8 years, basically teaching engineers skills about empathy and human skills. In Dev Academy, we went on the phrase human skills to name a lot of these things. And it's probably a smaller subset than you're talking about in the consensus with the U skills, where it's more like meshy, you know, getting alignment, building agreements, those kinds of skills as well, mentoring. Whereas the human skills is like a smaller subject, just about, can you listen? Can you have a difficult conversation? Can you, how is your self-confidence? In those kinds of practices. But Search Inside Yourself, it's a lot of stuff about mindfulness and journaling. It's sort of like Buddhist practices a little bit. Have been inspired to help people learn to grow their empathy muscles. And I find that book, particularly with engineers, even for introducing the concept of this thing of human skills. And just like you wouldn't be like dismissed because you're not a programmer. Like, it's just you don't have programming skills. Like, that's fine, right? And it's like, if someone's low on human skills, that's just where they're at. And it doesn't mean that they're a bad person or anything. It just means that they've got less skills in a certain area. And whereas I find that it's very different from that person's just an asshole. And it's more just like, well, actually, they just don't have skills and they haven't been invited into a way to develop those skills. Any other threads?
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that, like, just framing that like it's a skill that you learn and you can improve is something that I think a lot of people don't recognize. They're just like, oh, I'm just a bad listener, or like, I don't have empathy. And it's like, that's the way I am. It's not, they don't recognize it as something that they can improve. So just giving it that frame is a huge benefit.
Well, the final thought from me before we jump into the more practical stuff, which feels like I'm quite excited to get into, would be that idea of in a sort of one of the most useful foundational skills I've found for growing cultures of self-organizing are around the listening and speaking ones. And so this is because I think that there's a thing where it's like, if you're part of a group experience and you're just thinking, this is my experience, I'm angry at this, I'm happy at this, I like that, I don't like that. It's a very self-obsessed sort of viewpoint. And you can start to sort of lift it up a little bit, where how much of your brain capacity is actually going on other people's experience. What's Josh thinking right now? What's Sarah thinking right now? What's Claudia thinking? Like, you can start to do that. And I know some people where they'll be modeling everyone's experience a huge amount in a session, a conversation, or work in general. They'll have a really lot of information about other people's experiences. They'll be thinking about it. They'll be managing it. And that it's a sort of a different viewpoint. And then there's a level up from that, which is essentially about what's the group experience at the moment. Are we cohering? Are we divided? Is there actually a big disagreement in things? Do people and you're starting to think less about individuals in the group and more about the group as a whole. And the leaders you'll find are always thinking about the group sort of experience. And you'll often find that there are people who are really aware of lots of other people, and there's lots of people who are sort of just aware of their own experience. And helping people sort of expand their focus so that they're actually paying attention to other people's experiences, so they're actually paying attention to the group experience, is a fundamental baseline for self-organizing. If people aren't doing that, then it's much harder to work unless you have very strict sort of rules. Like, cool, here's the game we're playing. Hey everyone, we're going to play a game. It's called put things on a whiteboard and tick off your 5 favorite ones, and you've got a kind of self-organizing dynamic with a very rigid structure. But to have the more fluid structures, you need this high level of capability. And I find the best way, or my favorite way into this, is essentially the whole process of check-ins or people talking or doing rounds, is that you start to have this thing where you're listening much more than you're speaking, and you can start to have dynamics where you can start to reset people who talk all the time and dominate a conversation, or people who are very passive and they just listen and never speak up. And this interplay of how we speak and how we listen, I find is without naming any of those patterns, a way that people can become more aware of the group as a whole and more aware of other people's experiences. So that's, final thought there. Happy to move on.
Just one other question, if you don't mind. You mentioned check-ins as a way to help broaden the awareness of people in a team towards either one another or the group. Do you have any other things you've seen that work?
I find there's a really good rule of thumb I found, which is, this was from a person I've learned the most facilitation from, Billy Matheson, guy in New Zealand. And his thing was saying that if you're hosting a group of people, like 50 people for a retreat, that if you have about 2/3 of that community steeped in a culture, like there's a cultural way of being, which is normal, and maybe it's like consensus with the use skills, like they just have that vibe, they know what they are, they've spoken about it, they've done a lot of work on it, and you have 1/3 of the group who are new people, you won't have to do anything. You can sort of, with a very light touch, that culture will spread from the 2/3 to the third, and you'll start to have a lot of individuals taking small actions to reinforce or support the way we are together. If you've got 1/3 of the community is steeped in the culture and 2/3 aren't, you need to do a lot more work. You need to name, hey, there's a thing called consensus with the U skills, and here's some practices you might want to do. Like you need to give some more clear structures, and people will sort of assert themselves, or rather that culture will be preserved. And if you don't have any of that, you're in the sort of very low level forming a culture, and who are we and why are we here and how are we together? And I find that, so that's I guess a long way of saying that I found gatherings of getting people together, offsites, retreats, it's the most useful tool I found for building community culture, shared understanding, helping people see each other and learn those things. And check-ins are definitely a part of that, but so is open space and lots of other things that we like. I think I found that a lot of people, particularly in the tech industry, didn't think human skills could be taught, or rather they didn't think they could teach human skills. So I saw a lot of companies hiring for fit and personality and not worrying so much about the technical ability, like we can get them up to speed, and particularly when they're hiring more junior folks. And whereas I found that you can absolutely teach these skills, and by calling them skills and saying, cool, how are we going to get better at listening? There's actually a whole bunch of practices you can do to become a better listener. And I think that was one of my favorite pieces of feedback we ever got about our program to training programmers. Was like one of our students, his wife came and said, what did you do to him? He listens to me now. Like it's just a skill. You can learn how to do it much easier. So that by naming them as skills and moving that forward, that's probably another intervention. I found these core concepts. I guess we could advertise as that. Hey, the idea of send your spouse to a boot camp to. I found this idea of giving people leadership roles in a sort of supported way, because often I find there's a lot of some core patterns of conflict that I've seen in our communities and a lot of groups. Is one, you'll have like core and periphery. Like if you have a core team, like you named sort of 3 people in Academy, where they're like the sort of the leaders of the group, and then you've got lots of other people. Often it's really common that you'll have teams with a core in them, and it's 2 or 3 people, or it's 4 or 5 people, but there's a core team. And they're primarily, or a lot of their attention goes on, how does everyone else have an awesome time? So the core team usually spends a lot of time thinking about everyone else and changing things and doing stuff, making initiatives so everyone else has a good experience and the organism as a whole sort of works well. And that there's often really different experiences of being in the core and not being in the core. And there's a really different sort of ways of being there. And I find that the language of are we seeing parent-child relationships exert themselves? I actually think this is SO 101. They're probably doing this in week 4 or 5 or so on. I saw that on their curriculum, was around, and this is, there's a line of thinking from psychology and psychoanalysis called transactional analysis, which is sort of, this is where I found that idea of, are we having a parent-to-child dynamic here? Is someone sort of behaving like a parent and taking responsibility for others and having a lot more power in the relationship? Is someone abrogating responsibility and resenting authority in a sort of childlike way? Or are you having an adult-to-adult relationship? And that, I find that usually you can explain that stuff pretty quickly, and inviting people to notice, are we adults who are inviting each other to consent in a process together, or am I behaving paternalistic? Or am I behaving like a child and projecting an adult-like status onto someone else? That's probably the hardest thing to do, I found to do, is to reset people into that sort of experience.
So the concept of this core, doesn't that fundamentally go against self-organization?
Not really, because I think, and this is where, this is the really common thing, is like the idea of like leaderless, like there is no leader. And I think that it's really hard to work without leaders. And I find it can only really work in teams where there's a very close power asymmetry. Like if we're awesome facilitators and we're going to show up and facilitate a thing together, we can feel like a band who's jamming and you're like, you're doing something awesome, I'm doing it. It's like bang, 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 bang. Okay, there we go. And that can feel very leaderless. And you can do it when it's like 3, 4 people. I haven't seen leaderless work well at like 8, 10, 12 people, unless it's a team who's practiced heaps. And then you can start to see people sort of slotting in. So the idea is that it's usually a good pattern to have a few people who are consciously delegated to lead out on something. Okay, Claudia and Josh, I want you to go and figure out our X, Y, and Z. We're moving offices. Why don't you two lead out on that project? And by having sort of project leaders where there are people who are clearly invited or named to sort of help other people, it helps navigate the attention economy. It helps navigate delegations, but you've also sort of named this core periphery sort of dynamic where everyone sort of focuses in and looks at you, and then you sort of have responsibility to just take action. And the biggest thing that I find, thing I like about self-organizing is it doesn't crystallize those power structures that are the same for everything. If it was always Josh and Claudia who led on everything and you took responsibility for the office move, for the budget, for the compensation package, for the strategy, for the hiring new people, like that kind of thing, which is often what happens with like crystallized power structures. Whereas if you have a dynamic one, which is, okay, you're doing the hiring thing, you're doing this, and everyone leads some of the time and no one leads all of the time, you have a very different dynamic.
I have a question about that, and because when you mentioned the core group, like I definitely see that in Academy. Like we have 3 leaders, but then there's like me and Joshua and maybe a couple others that really step up and take ownership of team operations. But it's like we're consistently the ones that step up and take care of all of the team operations because we're self-appointing for these tasks, and there's just people that like don't do any of it. And I'm curious, like, how do we encourage that more spread out across the whole team? Because like part of the problem is like we like doing it, so we just step up and do it because it's like an opportunity to grow and learn more stuff and interact with new people. And then other people are just like more content to sit back, I guess, because like in meetings and stuff, there's definitely like when we get 13 of us together, there'll be like 5 of us that contribute. Like we're talking about our team health check right after this, so I'm excited to like start talking about that, but I'm fully expecting like half the team to contribute to most of the conversation. So how do we like prompt full team participation?
Cool. So I'd say that this is a really common thing I've seen across the board, where it's like people are attracted to things they like and people who don't like that thing aren't attracted to it, and when they'll leave it to other people. And sometimes that can work great. Like not all of us need to reconcile the accounts. It's okay if only a couple of people do that. And it's okay if that skill doesn't get spread around the team. it's highly inefficient to have everyone really good at everything. And so having people specialize on the things they like and the things they're good at makes a lot of sense. I think on the, so the thing I would just say is, like, is that working for you or is it not? Like, what are the downsides of the way it is currently? Are there consequences of 5 of you talking more than other people that you don't like? And instead of saying, I don't like that there are 5 of us more engaged than the other 8 or so, that you can start to say, well, actually, what's good about that and what's bad about that? And if there are things that are bad about it, address those things directly. And it might be, okay, instead of having an open conversation with 13 of us where we know 5 people will just talk and 8 people will watch, you could start to say, we're going to get into groups of 3. And in your group of 3, your job is to, here's 10 minutes, do X, Y, and Z, and then each of the groups of 3 present back to the whole group. And then all of a sudden you've lifted participation quite a lot. So one of the patterns that I found incredibly useful for, like, facilitation 101 in a way, first thing is rearrange the furniture. Be conscious of how you're situated. Are we all in a Zoom room like this? Are we sitting in a circle? Are we all facing one person who's talking? So mental furniture, physical furniture. The second thing is basically going whole group, small group, individual work. And by having a variety of, here's how we're doing things as all of us together. Here's how we're doing things with 2s or 3s or 4s. Here's how, okay, for 2 minutes, I just want you to write a list of the most important priorities you see for our team. And then, okay, let's share them up on a group. And varying between whole group, small group, and individual, you can start to create group experiences which can have a different outcome.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. All right. Yeah, so shall we jump into the reflections on the health checks and the plans forward? I feel like we spent too long on talking. Sorry. Let's go. Who wants to go first?
I can go first. Yeah, so I sent out a sheet for people to fill out, but also sent out a form so people could make it more anonymous. And I just compiled all of the results. I basically just have the 3 lowest scores are development, feedback, and accountability for our team. And then there were 3 areas where we had large spreads. Like, some people ranked us a 1 and some people ranked us a 5. So I noted those. And we have development, feedback, and decision making. So development and feedback are on both of those, in both of those categories. And I personally think feedback is somewhere where Academy can improve. But just something I noticed when I'm compiling these results, it's like each one of us has a totally different perspective of the team. We work in, like, different work streams. So, like, I thought spread would kind of be, like, bad at first, but, like, we're just different. We have different perspectives in the team. So I'm, like, realizing that it's not necessarily bad. It's like, for some people, like, maybe some other groups do provide great feedback to each other, and that's just not something that my group does. So, like, as a team, it's not well defined. So, like, we could improve that. Maybe, like, one part of the team could learn from another part of the team. But yeah, that's what we've got.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm hoping discussion, like, basically I'm just going to walk through the sheet and hopefully people talk to the points and what they thought about as they were giving scores that they did. And basically I would just want to identify 1 or 2 areas, like, have the team come to consensus on 1 or 2 areas that we can just focus on and intentionally improve together.
Josh, did you get, was it easy to get everybody to do the survey or the form, fill out the form, or did you have to sort of hound people down, or did some people not do it?
So we have 11 responses out of 13 total. But we had 1 new hire, and her first day was Wednesday. So I included her in the list just because she's on our team. And I told her, like, hey, don't worry about this at all because you don't have perspective. So no worries. And she's included in that. And then I don't know who the missing one is. some people didn't answer questions because there are people on the team that are only have been here for 2 or 3 weeks. So there were comments that said, I don't feel comfortable commenting on this. But basically I just sent out an email last Wednesday, and then I sent out an email yesterday just reminding. So people were pretty good about it.
Great. That's great.
Cool. And so what's your plan of attack for running through the session?
Plan of attack is to just kind of go through the list of talk to purpose. So we have a question, how clear and effective is the team's purpose? And then I'll say what our average was. We had 3.7 average on that with a min score of 2 and a maximum score of 5. And I'll just ask if anybody has any reflections on why they gave the score that they did. And then kind of just go through the list. And hopefully we can get some discussion going about most of them, all of them.
Cool. Yeah, only suggestion I'd have on that would be consciously choose the order you go through. Just because they were presented in a certain order, that might not be the optimal order for the session. And I find you can have different strategies on that. One of them is around the idea of doing some easy ones first. So what are some ones where you think that there's closer spread than others, that to sort of practice it a little bit, or you can try and choose one of the easiest hard ones. So if you go with the ones where there's a lot of diversity or a lot of homogeneity or convergence, then it's sort of oh, there's not much to talk about. So it can feel a bit like meh before you get to the good stuff. So choosing a good warm-up one, which might be mid-level, enough diversity, but not too much, to practice a little bit. And then maybe one of the easy ones where everyone's in alignment before jumping into the ones where there's large spread, so that people are warmed up for the perhaps bigger conversations.
Josh, I was just curious, how long is your meeting to go through it?
So we have an hour. I was looking at the agenda, and basically I'm just going to give an update on the developer program real quick at the beginning. I'm just going to keep that really short so we have as much time as possible for this. So I'm thinking it's going to be hopefully 50 minutes.
Cool. And yeah, sounds great. Love to hear where you get to in terms of the interventions you're doing. And so it might be after your session, if you've got any questions about the strategies you're going to try and implement or how you're going to gather information. If I was kicking this off from scratch, it sort of depends how mature the ideas are people have. Like it's, feedback. Okay, here's the stuff which we've already been working on. Let's just try and move it through more. Or it's like, whoa, what are we going to do about feedback? Let's start from ground zero. So it could be you go into an information gathering of okay, 2 or 3 people are going to go and find stuff and suggest it to the team, and having people who most care about the topic and inviting them to say, okay, if we can get 2 or 3 people who want to lead out on this, on finding an intervention and saying they're going to try and move us from a 2 to a 3, and having this idea of framing the next step as how can we move one of these numbers, or which numbers are most important for us to move, is often a good conversation. So if you leave enough time for the what are we going to do about it bit, finding a couple of volunteers to lead out on a thing and then report back on the next phase, then it's all about supporting those initiatives. And then you can just redo the score. Hey, everyone, let's count again. What do you think now? And if you can actually move numbers, the team can see, we are actually moving more towards where we want to be.
Yeah, I really like that idea of asking for volunteers to help gather information to improve the next step. Really involve the team in the process, because it is a team process. It's not just hey, Josh, do this stuff for us. But yeah, that's helpful.
If you've got people if you need to give more support, you can sort of say, who wants to pair with me to do something? If someone doesn't want to take responsibility for it, and it's sort of like a judgment call about actually how keen are people and how much of a support do they need. But I would say the best thing is if people do it. Second best is if you pair with people, and the third best is if you do it for them.
Okay, yeah, I'll go in that order in my request.
Cool. How'd the other process go? Oh, sorry. Yeah, is there anything more you want on Academy stuff, Josh, or happy to bounce?
Nope, that's good. Thanks.
So I think that the curveball, and I don't know, Sarah, if I should start off with this. So we were approaching this as the org dev team, which is 8 of us. But org dev falls within Project DNA, and there's org dev and global ops in Project DNA. So the big question that keeps coming up in the last few weeks, and it's sort of hit this point where we have to address it, is should we be doing more things as a team? And we had I don't even know what we had. We had org dev stand up. Anyway, in that meeting, it came up that maybe this health check should be given to all of Project DNA versus org dev, which, like, it was interesting because I agreed with the idea that org dev and global ops should be Project DNA and work together to figure out each other's goals and all this stuff. But for whatever reason, I felt tension of the idea of sharing this with global ops. And I think partly it's because I feel like we have to, figure ourselves out before we can. But that kind of goes against where everybody wants to go, everywhere we want to go. So I'm sort of stuck. I'm not sure. And we asked, everybody on the team seemed to agree with wanting to have all of DNA work on the health check. But I'll like pass it on to Sarah. Just, I don't know, Sarah, what you thought or what your perspective was.
Yeah, we're in a bit of an identity crisis at the moment. There's so much like history and background, like why there are 2 separate teams, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense actually. It's there's a lot of like political reasons, and like I don't know, it's a bit messy. But I think there are a couple things that have changed in the recent past. One is that the org dev team, which is about 8 now, went from like me full-time plus 2 other people half-time to like 8 people, right? So org dev expanded. Global ops is still 3, or was like 2.5. Yeah, like 2 and is now 3 or so full-time. So there's a bit of an imbalance in the number of people. The org dev team has a lot of new people. And the second thing that's changed is like, we've gone from being, we've moved to an organizational way of, no, sorry, like, I don't even know how to explain it, but just like the way that we're doing our planning, we're doing it, and our project teams, we're doing it by product. So we're looking at all the different products that we're building and working on, and programs that we're building and working on, and then identifying sub-teams. Because now we're not just like everybody working on everything. We actually have people, right? So we're finding that like Claudia, who's predominantly on org dev, is like also working on global ops stuff. And, there's a lot of people like moving across. So, I mean, naturally, like, productizing and having a lot more people, it's making more sense to think of us as a broader group. Do we need to do the team health check in a bigger group? I don't know. But so I just, in the meeting yesterday that we had with like the org dev group, I shared the results with the team health check, and, I let someone pick one that they wanted to discuss and talk about. I think the one we discussed as a group was development. And and Josh, I guess I the reason why I asked you how long you had is because I think it was really nice to get people's perspectives on why they chose what they chose, right? And there's a lot of insight in hearing people's comments and getting the discussion going, right? So I think I thought it was a little bit more value to go deep on one rather than like just talk about all of them. So the more time you have, Josh, to go deep on a couple, I think the better, the more insight you'll get in terms of any sort of intervention or understanding people's perspectives. But development was really interesting because it was one that we had across, like we had a lot of disparity. We had like 1s and 5s. We had everything all over the place. So I think, you know, I don't know. The discussion was really like, oh no, sorry, I'm looking. We didn't have any 5s. We had 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. But you know, like the discussion was, I don't know, I thought pretty good. I don't really know what to say about it other than I think like my one of the pieces that I brought up, and like Claudia can speak to her, is like I put a 1 for development for myself, I can say specifically. And I think there's development is kind of like, there's a couple some of the other health checkpoints, like development is kind of an output. Like you need to get a couple of the other ones right, or work on a couple of the other ones for development even to be like a thing. I think, like, for example, like roles, like clarity, if roles are unclear and decision making is unclear, we have a lot of lack of clarity around there. Like, I don't know, I just think like if you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like we're just trying to get things done and we're like so in this tactical mode of just go. Like how do we even like start to think about development, and what does that even mean? And that's why I answered the way I answered. And I personally, you know, I don't have a development plan for myself at all, nor do I have like support at all in the company. So yeah.
And I think what came from that too was that stirred up a lot of conversation. One of the perspectives was that stop saying that the idea is for you to take ownership of your development and go seek it. But then others said, you know, it's not in our culture, like it's not something that's ever really discussed, or no, you know, who knows where to go and stuff like that. So the disparity definitely came out in the conversation. I think we didn't go through each of the questions. And I think maybe it's, you know, we all sort of put Sarah on the spot, like, hey, you know, Sarah's goal when we started that meeting was to get everybody, make sure everybody filled it out. And then it evolved to, it should be DNA. And then it's like, well, you know, Sarah, show us what you have. So I think going through each question would be helpful for sure, which I know is what we're going to do, because we did open it up to DNA. Because there were a few questions there that I think we need to talk about and get more understanding from everybody. It's just the development one was much more, you know, it was like the only one that had votes on each of the numbers, I think. And the other thing that came up was that, Sarah, I think you said this, that it was important to answer these questions not by how you felt in the moment, but how, you know, what you know about your team. And I wonder if that would change the answers later, you know. So it was a great conversation. I think we have to hone in more, like how Josh is going to do. I think that'll be very informative to get a feel of how everybody feels.
I also found it nice to have everyone participate. You know, it was a nice conversation to have, to get everyone sharing and giving their perspective, right? And, you know, we definitely have a lot of like loudest voice in the room issues, challenges. So I really liked the small discussion we had on development.
Cool. A couple of thoughts. I found that if you've got groups of people with very different experiences, like if you've got one team called this and another team that, then sometimes you can do the health check with 2 columns. How do you see it in your particular small team? How do you see it in the wider big team? And often that can prompt different parts of information. I don't know if that's appropriate with the sort of 3/8 split you've got at the moment, and especially if you're trying to build in a more cohesion, like we're all in this together, then that might not be a good thing to reinforce, but that is because if people have like clusters of experience. Like if everyone's going to have different experiences, but if you've got 3 people with all their numbers are in a different sort of ballpark than everyone else's, just because they live in different worlds, then that's one way to segment it. I think that you bang on about the Maslow's hierarchy in terms of if a team's going to sacrifice anything, usually development will go first. Let's just not worry about it. Let's just get the job done in however we can. And so it's kind of like I wouldn't call it a luxury item in a way, but it is one of the things where a team starts to think about actually how are we investing in our people together, or how are we investing in each other and our skills, then it usually means they're in a good place. One of the other things that you can do with the development one is if you do an exercise which is like individually what are the 3 most important areas you're trying to grow professionally, and then you sort of do that yourself. But then if you say, well, what's your team members' 3 important things that they're growing on? Often that can make the point about it's one thing to know what you're working on, but how do you know what Claudia's priorities are, and how are you supporting her and how is she supporting you? So that can be a little bit of a test to make a point sometimes. Because I found that if you have things where people have got learning plans and I'm trying to do this and I want to get it done by here and everyone knows that, then you can have a different sort of culture of learning together. Is one exercise. But yeah, it's cool to hear the experiences. Did you have any interventions that you planned on making on development after that conversation, or is it still at the let's keep having conversations stage?
So in terms of development and interventions, I don't know if it's the one to work on. Not really sure, but we are planning a team off-site, on-site, in-person on-site for probably one of the first weeks in November. So I think I would love to get into that conversation in that time where we're together. Like just in general, I think, on the health check, there were points that were super weak. We had like roles, who does what, when, as a really low one, agreements, decision-making, like clarity on decision-making. Those were all like the main lowest ones. And I just think there needs to be a lot of time spent in that offsite learning with one another, like learning about one another, like what are, like, what is Claudia really good at, and what is she passionate about, and what makes her excited to be part of this team, and like if she could work on like one thing, what would it be, right? And just really getting deep into that, and then the development conversation comes out of it, right? And understanding what things are like stretch goals for her, and like what she can get involved in, and who can support her in that, and like, yeah, I think it folds into the offsite, onsite, offsite, onsite.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd love development to be a part of it, but also like roles, decision making, like it's just so opaque right now and unclear, in a way. Like we have like project teams, but a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to be on that project team. Well, why, right? Like, so we're just defaulting to these like bigger ballooning groups of people, but we don't need to do that anymore because we have a group of people with a diverse skill set to bring. So we can have lots of like very tight sub teams, I think. But yeah, so all those things.
Yeah, that's a key. That's definitely the role and needing to be present. And I think there is improvement there, but there's definitely that conversation needs to happen on, yeah, I'm just going to say what Sarah just said, because that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Cool. Personally, I'm very comfortable with the plan of like do nothing for a while. Like I wouldn't feel the pressure to rush in and make interventions. If people have interventions, they come up, then great. But to me, I feel like the health check game, and often I think about interventions in groups as how can we build a game we can all play together? How can we define some sort of shape of it, some sort of expectations, some norms? but it's really, it's not about the game. It's about the connection you have with each other. So the things that the health check process is designed, like the reason for the 1s to 5s and the let's talk about the divergent things, is really so people can get to know each other, and they can learn more about each other through having some prompts in. That's what Sarah thinks about development, etc. Or I love the one about what most excites someone about being here. So by creating a space where people can regularly spend time together and reflect on how are we working, what's working, what's not, sort of thing, and how can we get to know each other in the process in a deeper sort of way, that's setting up the sort of the precursor to success. So that's why it's designed in that way. So if you don't get outcomes, if you don't have interventions of we're going to move these numbers, I think that's really fine. It's all about do you have a regular rhythm where the team talks about each other and explores things together.
The tricky thing with that is there are people on the team that keep saying, well, we should have done this yesterday. Well, we're in a rush. We need to do this. We need to do this. And it's not many people. And it's a common theme with the voices that are speaking. It's common for them to say that particular thing. So I feel like we're in a flow. We're feeling good. We're learning, and then bam, it's like, okay, psych, we need this now. Like, get it together, figure it out. And it's like trying to deal with that, and it's a powerful voice in the room that often says it. So I would love to respect time with this, because there is so much to unravel. And to Sarah's point, it really was a great conversation yesterday, and that was a big step. Like, it was a different tone on the call, I would say. But I don't think it's something that, it would be great if we don't have to like rush it and half-ass it and basically not do much, because we have to pretend that we're functioning when at our best when we're not.
Mm-hmm. I think the question of how to get optimal progress from an organic system is a really challenging one. I think the first one is I just keep reinforcing this is an organic system. We can't just construct it in 2 days or 2 weeks and let's do a 2-day offsite and just solve everything, and then we'll have a plan and we'll execute that plan, is a very mechanical way of thinking. And so I would just reinforce the organic systems, but still you can move fast. Organic systems can grow incredibly quickly. And I usually do it by having a small pattern which replicates quite quickly around. So if you do want rapid change, then I would define the scope of your change as small as possible and as safe as possible, and just do lots of little ones of them. And so that might be one strategy that works. But I definitely think that consensus is full of challenging situations for people and teams, and a common one is growth and lots of new people, but also lots of goals and ambitions and trying to get things done quickly. So it's definitely, I can understand the situation.
Yeah, something we were I've kind of tried to start is just having one-on-ones with people on my team, and have it be like feedback time and like connection. So I'm kind of testing it to see if that will spread. So one of my teammates started doing it with me, and then I started doing it with like 2 other teammates. So we'll see. So yeah, I just love the idea of like starting really small and then like seeing if it replicates.
All right. Any other, topics, questions, reflections from this week or last week, the last sort of 10 minutes? Happy to roll into a checkout and bounce early.
Well, I just had one more thing on the power conversation. So, I love the framework that you brought up, and like just going through each of those points just was really bringing up a lot of things in the team for me. But like you said, making them transparent is the first step. Well, not first step, just they have to be known, right? And not hidden. I don't know. I guess I don't know where to start, because everything's like very situational, but I would just love or appreciate your advice on like how to make more transparent or bring up those sorts of things.
I don't know if it's the thing I would suggest is the first intervention is like, cool, let's just put it in the middle and talk about it. And I think it's like you said, very contextual and dependent. I find that the one thing I would suggest is just when you're thinking about your team and the interventions you want to take, pay attention to power contours and start to think about them in terms of skills, reputation, time, money. That's a really useful analytical framework I find, which I can bring to bear on any organizational situation. And just being aware of those contours, and then I think it would be, you can start to form your impressions about actually, do you want to name it? I think that to have a highly functioning self-organizing team, I think you need a level of consciousness amongst all the participants where people are aware of these, and that it's not just a few people thinking about power contours, but if you've got more, it's like you need to get to a certain level before that's a way of doing it. And I would probably suggest a slow and steady on that one in particular, because I think if you tug on it's sort of like tugging on a pillar that might be bearing, like you've got a wall in a building and it might be bearing load, it might be not. Let's just knock it down and find out. And if you knock down the wall and it was bearing load, the roof falls in on you. So I think sometimes you can tug on threads in teams, particularly if there's challenges where it's like pulling out a load-bearing wall. And it's probably better just to have left the wall and painted it. And then maybe build another wall, and then you can pull out that old one that you don't want to deal with. So that would be, I'd suggest going slow, particularly with power, going slowly and just thinking about the different aspects.
Thanks.
Happy to go into checkouts. Great. So essentially reflections from this session. What are the bits that sort of stand out for you if you think about it? And we went through a little bit of stuff on power. We went through a little bit of reflection on last week, and tyranny of structurelessness. I think there were lots of little tangents going off in there. It's one of those things where I'm like, oh, I'm glad we made a video. I'm probably going to watch that again and just see all this stuff that I don't remember in my head. So that was probably my reflection from this and takeaway was that I feel like it's this whole thing about how to build high functioning self-organizing teams. It's actually a really large body of work and knowledge and things to do in a way, and that there's all these different threads to pull on. And so I got excited by a few tangents. I'd love your reflection later on, but was that useful or was that not? I'm still open-minded. It's like I enjoyed those conversations, but I'm really curious about, this is all about what you find useful. So that's probably my main reflection from the session. And let's go popcorn style. So instead of naming someone, it's just whoever feels like speaking can speak. Like corn that feels like popping.
I guess I can go because I feel like I kind of already went. I mean, my reflection was on the power piece and what to do about that and how to be thoughtful. And it's so contextual, but thanks for your advice on that.
Yeah, I can go. I think just mentioning the power asymmetries is helpful because just like by naming it, it becomes conscious, and then we're like, I'll be aware of it in future meetings, and it's just like, it will be helpful. But also the intrinsic motivation thing really struck a chord with me, and like the more we can intrinsically motivate each other on our team and like build support for intrinsic motivation, like the better it will be, because you don't have to like tell people to do anything. Like they just want to do it. Like you build games that like, basically support intrinsic motivation, which is super cool. And then also just the last point, on the help check, like you mentioned, interventions aren't totally necessary. Just the exercise of going through the help check is super valuable in itself. And I think I've been feeling like I know there will be people on the team like, okay, what do we do next? What's the action item? And it's like, well, maybe we don't have an action item. Maybe we just learn something from the conversation we had and go from there. Like, just see what happens in the next week or two. So just hearing that was helpful.
So two takeaways, or two sort of things that always stay with me is this idea of there being, not confusing a core on a team with like a dictator on a team or someone that has all this power. It's more about leadership, and I think that gets lost, certainly on my part, right? Not that I think self-organization is anarchy or anything like that, but I think it's those kinds of words that flags go up for the mesh. And so Joshua, the way you explained it was like very soothing and like, no, this is important. We need leadership, and it's not crystallized. I think you said it's dynamic, which I also thought was really something to marinate with. Like on our team, there are certain people that take on these leadership roles, and my gut is to fight it sometimes because like we're self-organized, but not in thinking about it, it's like it's actually really important, really, really important. So I think I want to work on that script, so when it comes up, I can sort of say, well, here's why it's good, you know. I also liked what you said about the challenge of, can you name what your other teammates want in terms of development? I think that's a great exercise. Personally, I don't think I could. Anybody. And I actually remember having a conversation with someone on the team a while ago and asking her like flat out, like, what do you want to do? Not what do you have to do? What do you want to do on the team? And she couldn't answer me either. So I think it would just be a great exercise, and I'm excited about hopefully doing that with the team.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, yeah, it was definitely a rich conversation. Thanks all for your time, and look forward to the one next week. So I'll post up these the links to sort of 4 articles. Read them or don't read them as you like. And yeah, best of luck with everything, and see you in a week's time.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Joshua. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.